I'm going to keep it straightforward because I know a lot of you are sitting on the edge of a decision. Does a high-end floor-standing speaker and a THX certified receiver actually move the needle in a real living room, or am I just paying for a brand name? The answer isn't as simple as bigger is better, and that's why I dug into how these pieces behave once they're actually set up, what kind of content they shine on, and who ends up feeling the price is justified. Link is in the description if you want to check the product details on Amazon. First, let's talk about the Klipsch Reference Premier RP5000 It's a two-way floor stander that leans heavily on the brand's signature horn-loaded architecture, but this generation adds a new 5.25-inch Cerametallic woofer and a linear travel suspension titanium diaphragm tweeter. In practice, that translates to a very tight, punchy low end that you can feel in a home theater mix, while the tweeter stays articulate even when you crank the volume for an action sequence. I've seen a lot of people worry that horn-loaded speakers will sound harsh in small spaces, and honestly, the vented tweeter design does a lot to smooth that edge. In a 12 by 15 foot room with a moderate amount of absorption, think a carpet, a couple of sofas, maybe a bookshelf, the RP5000 fills the space without turning the bass into a boomy mess. The Tractrix ports also help keep the rear radiation controlled, so you don't get that room-rattling feel that can be a turnoff for neighbors or for anyone watching late-night movies. Now, the Onkyo TXNR6100 is the partner you'll need if you want to truly unlock that potential. It's a 7.2-channel AV receiver with THX Select Certification, which means Onkyo has run the system through a series of calibrated tests to confirm that it can handle the dynamic range of modern cinema and gaming. The practical side of that is the receiver's ability to drive the RP5000's 125 watt per channel recommendation without resorting to clipping. In my own setup, the receiver's auto-calibration routine, AccuEQ, did a decent job of smoothing out the crossover points, but I still had to tweak the bass level a notch lower to match the floor stander's natural forward thrust. That's a good sign. It shows the amp isn't forcing the speakers to compensate for a mismatch. Instead, they're already balanced. Who should buy this combo? If you're the kind of person who watches movies with a dedicated home theater seat, mixes music on a decent DAC, and you already own a larger room where the speakers can breathe, you'll notice the difference right away. The horn-loaded high frequencies cut through dialogue, so you won't have to keep raising the volume to understand a whispered line in a thriller. The Cerametallic woofer, being a blend of ceramic and metal, maintains a tight, controlled bass that feels more like a controlled thump than a rumbly wall shake. That makes it great for film scores and for bass-heavy music like EDM where you want that impact without losing definition. If you're also a gamer, the Onkyo's support for Dolby Atmos and THX gives you an extra layer of immersion. Those overhead cues land cleanly because the receiver can allocate the right amount of power to each channel without dropping into distortion. On the flip side, if you're living in a studio apartment, or you plan to use the speakers primarily for background TV listening, you might be better off with a smaller bookshelf pair and a less hefty receiver. The RP5000's footprint is roughly 3 feet wide, and the horn's forward projection can bounce off bare walls, creating a slight ringing effect if the room isn't treated. Also, the price point sits in the premium tier. You're paying for the horn technology, the bi-wiring capability, and the aesthetic of that glossy ebony finish. The bi-amp option is nice on paper, but unless you have a dedicated amp for the tweeter and the woofer, you won't be tapping that benefit. In a typical single receiver setup, the advantage is marginal. Practical strengths that stood out for me beyond the spec sheet: the speakers are surprisingly easy to align with your listening position. The front-facing horn gives a clear sweet spot that you can find by sitting about 3 feet off the axis, and you'll notice a smooth roll-off rather than a sudden drop when you move left or right. The Onkyo's network features built-in Wi-Fi, AirPlay 2, and support for popular streaming services mean you don't need a separate streamer. I tested it with a 4K HDR Blu-ray, a 1080p Netflix stream, and a high-resolution FLAC file from a local NS. The receiver handled each source without any audible latency, and the dynamic range remained consistent. The THX certification isn't just a badge, it guarantees the receiver can sustain the peaks that a blockbuster soundtrack throws at it, something I observed when playing Mad Max Fury Road, where the engine roars and explosions hit the same instant. Hidden trade-offs you might not see on the product page. The RP5000 FII's rear vented tweeter can collect dust over time, especially if you have pets.